Hello, my name is Amy Ecker, and I'm going to be sharing my presentation for Concordia University's EDU 605, our capstone class. And my team and I did an action research with a particular intervention, and I would like to share those highlights with you this evening. So thank you in advance for listening. Okay, so first of all, we have our problem. And what we noticed is that students were having a hard time engaging in the curriculum, especially in the field of social studies, um, where teacher tends to lecture, the students copy down notes, memorize dates, memorize facts, and they were just having a hard time dealing with that. Um, as most kids are probably seeing or not seeing the relevance or the importance of why they have to learn this information. Technology is everywhere, but we don't necessarily see it in the classroom. It's probably one of the last places that it is. And so, because of this lack of technology in the classroom, my partners and I felt that it was sort of aiding to the disengagement and the lack of motivation with the students, which is basically aiding to their low achievement. So as we were seeing that and discussing that, I have a quote for you here. It says, "Since the advent of the internet and personal computers, we no longer compete with the people next door, city, or state, but with the people around the world." And that's from Chung, even in 2007. So, uh, you know, 8 years later, we're still seeing even more of an importance that we need to somehow bring in technology into that classroom. The purpose of our study was basically to see what would happen if we were to integrate Chromebooks into our classroom. Would it help with engagement and motivation? Would it help students with their proficiency? And we also wanted kids to have practice collaborating in class. We felt that there was accountability in small groups. We felt that they wanted that sense of teamwork, that would maybe help motivate them to do more. Also, we see the importance of the 21st century skills. So, making sure we incorporate research with the technology, as well as things like communication, critical thinking, creativity, and along with the other C that I just spoke of, collaboration. Those are 4 C's that are kind of addressed with the 21st century skills. In addition, with the onset of Common Core state standards, it's really trying to gear and focus teachers to make sure we get our students not just college ready, but college and career ready. There's that focus again on that 21st century skills. And also, what is going on is Google is really doing a fantastic job with their applications for education. And we wanted to take advantage of that in our intervention. So, our research questions that drove our project, the first one was, what impact will the use of Chromebooks have on 5th and 6th grade students' level of engagement and motivation to succeed in social studies? And what effects will Chromebooks have on the proficiency levels of 5th and 6th grade students in social studies? So, the key was, or our first driving question really was that engagement and motivation, because we felt like if we can get the kids more motivated and we could get the kids engaged in the curriculum, then we would see those scores rise because there would be more learning. Or at least that's what we're hoping to see. We then went and read all the literature and tried to find out what does the research say. And it's very hard to condense, 20, 30 pages of information down into a few bullet points. But what we did here is we pulled out some information that we thought was crucial about engagement and motivation. So if you just want to look at the highlighted parts with me, that first bullet there basically says that technology promotes proficiency in those 21st century skills, which we told you was important. The next bullet point talks about that when students are engaged in technology within their classroom, that there's an increased level of achievement, and that's from Savage and Brown. And the next bullet point, that technology will help improve and support student engagement, which then will increase the knowledge and performance, and that's from Bell in 2012. That's right there with our research questions. The next bullet is addressing Google's model, and their model is to support a dynamic environment that moves away from lectures and really engages students in the learning process. And finally, that technology allows students to go at their own pace instead of too fast or too slow if it's teacher-led rather than teacher-facilitated. So when students have that technology, they are able to control their learning, which makes the engagement go up, and it makes the understanding and that depth of knowledge go up as well with the subject matter. And that's from Krull and Renier, 2015. In addition to this, we felt like integrating Chromebooks is an important key to the school. For example, my school, several years back, purchased laptop computers. We got a set of 15 laptop computers for every English teacher at our school. And the rest of the departments complained and said, why do they have those? You know, and of course we do a lot of writing. I teach for a high school, about 2,000 plus students in Central California. And we do a lot of writing in my department. But, you know, everybody else was jealous. Well, you know, a couple years later, they bought the whole entire social studies department Chromebooks. And because Chromebooks are about half, maybe even a little less, of the price than the laptops, they were able to get class sets of 30 for each teacher. Well, then the English teachers complained and said, how are we supposed to share these? 2 people to a computer, and the social studies teachers have one for every kid. And if that weren't the only problem, the other problem is that Chromebooks can bypass things that a regular computer can't with your school server. So with the laptop computers, it might take a couple of minutes. Sometimes if the internet is a little slow and how many access points there are, it could even take up to 10 minutes when they're all trying to log in at the same time. The Chromebooks just bypass that, and they're very fast. In just seconds, they will turn on and load up. So some of the interventions that we did for our study can be done on laptops, but Chromebooks have the advantage. Like I said, they cost less than half. I mean, I think our laptops cost about $600 per computer, whereas you can get some good Chromebooks for just a couple $100. So it's really worth your while to invest in the Chromebooks. If you're just using it for the internet purposes and things like that, and you don't have specific programs that you want to load on it. And Google, again, has really made that a fantastic thing for students. Okay, so as far as participants go and our setting, we chose to do our intervention in a K-8 public school that's in Southern California. It is in a downtown area of the city, so it's near businesses. Many of the kids walk to school and live nearby, but there are some that are bused. It is one of 13 elementary schools in that district there, and 15% of the population is below the poverty line. However, 74% of students are considered socioeconomically disadvantaged by school state standards. Our intervention was done with 29 students. It was a combination class of 5th and 6th graders, and there were 9 5th grade students, and then 20 of the students were 6th graders. Of those 29 students, 25 were Asian and 4 were Hispanic. 3%, basically one student is an ELL person. 55%, just a little bit over half, are redesignated fluent English proficient. So what we saw is basically this lack of interest in social studies with the students. 2/3 of the students expressed that social studies was not their favorite subject, and this was done by our teacher or intervention expert at that K-8 school in the beginning of the year. She noticed that the students were struggling, especially in social studies, because 1/3 of those students were not even passing in that subject area, and this was according to information she had after the first progress reports after the first 8 weeks of school. So she also noticed that as the rigor increased, the the engagement went down. So our desire was to integrate the Chromebooks, and because her school had purchased some carts that could kind of be shuffled around, she booked them, and we decided to do the intervention in her class. We felt that students being able to have kind of a hands-on approach, more student-centered approach rather than the teacher-centered. Also that with the use of technology, that students might be able to connect more deeply to the information. Also, we're just super excited about Google's vision, and that they want to really further and advance that student learning through their technology, and they make it really simple to be able to do that. Also, they really promote the 21st century skills, which I've addressed already, those 4 C's there. Okay, as far as our intervention goes, so we brought a class set in, and we made sure that every student had their own Chromebook to be able to use during class. We did a 5-week study with this social studies unit, and because it was a combination class, we did many of the same activities and the same intervention with both 5th and 6th graders. It's just their standards and their content would be different for 5th and 6th grade, but we try to keep it as very, very similar. Excuse me. So the intervention expert used Google Classroom. Google Classroom has some features like announcements, questions, and assignments on there. Some of the other Google apps that we used were Google Docs, Google Forms, Slides, and also Sheets. And then at the end of the intervention, we gave them a team performance task or a team project that they worked on together utilizing the Chromebooks and the Google apps. Yes, they were put into, actually they chose their groups of 2 to 3 for their final project. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more of the specifics of the intervention. Week 1, of course, was spent giving some of those pre-intervention things. Okay, so before we actually started the unit, we wanted to give a questionnaire out. We did one for social studies. We did another one for technology. We also asked for some volunteers, and we got 5 student volunteers to interview one-on-one and ask them the same questions and just responded their open-ended statements to the teacher. We also did an intervention, pre-intervention, I should say, assessment on the social studies unit. We just took that straight from the textbooks that the district has adopted for that particular school. So 5th grade was working on colonies, and 6th grade, their unit was on ancient Egypt. We spent some time making sure the students knew what their Gmail account was and how to access that on the Chromebook, and then taught them how to join Google Classroom. And then they watched some introduction videos and responded to some short prompts. So 5th grade watched a video on the 13 colonies, and they did an assignment using Google Docs that was about brain pop video. 6th graders did one on ancient Egypt and the Nile River. And then they answered those questions on Google Docs. Basically, the goals and objectives of the teacher was that she wanted the students to not just learn and be able to state the facts as maybe many of us did growing up in our social studies classes, but to really be able to formulate their opinions on topics, and even more so to transition to this online community through Google Classroom to be able to discuss these opinions about the topic. So here, just so you can see here are some of the questions that we allowed the students to read and answer on a piece of paper before we started the actual unit. You can see it starts there. If you could choose any subject to work on the whole school day, which would it be? And all the way to the last question, when an assignment is fun, I will be more motivated to complete it. So even though this was a social studies questionnaire, you can see that it really addressed maybe some more general learning questions and how they feel about things. The other questionnaire that we gave them dealt more with technology, everything from what kind of technology are you familiar with and what do you use just on a personal basis, to what do you use at school. And finally, if you look at that last bullet right over here, it says, I feel confident using Chromebooks in social studies will improve. I feel confident that using Chromebooks in social studies will improve my grades. So we did ask them that in the beginning, and we did ask them these questions again at the end. I'm trying to get rid of that. Okay, week 2. For 5th grade, the teacher gave a lesson using Google Slides on the Spanish colonies. She then gave a classroom announcement. She posted the slides that she had presented onto Google Classroom, so they had access to that and the notes, even though they were encouraged to take notes during the lesson. But they had access to that on Classroom to be able to go back and reference that for any other assignments. The teacher also gave an assignment on Google Classroom where they were to read a passage, do a sort of a compare-contrast that was provided for them on a Google Doc. Read 2 poems, answered some comprehension questions, again on Google Doc, watched Plymouth Plantation video, completed a double entry journal. Whereas 6th grade, they were able to get a lesson on the Nile Valley. The teacher again posted those notes and the slides from that presentation onto Google Classroom for them, asked a question where this was done as homework, where they wrote a post and they responded to a prompt on Google Classroom, and then they had to go back and respond to 2 peers. So if you're familiar or not familiar with Google Classroom, there's a question feature, and it's very similar to a discussion board. So students can see each other's answers and they can respond to each other. So this is a way to sort of have a discussion that is not out loud, but certainly people can voice their opinions. They were also given an assignment where they viewed a map. They answered some questions on Google Docs. They read a passage. They were shown some photo images, and then they had to respond to some questions on Google Docs. And they did a compare and contrast table using Google Sheets, which is very similar to like an Excel spreadsheet. All right, so as you can see, I'm going to kind of go through the next few weeks rather quickly. Same type of thing in week 3, a teacher-led lesson for the 5th graders, and then some, and posting that presentation there on announcement, asking some questions so that they can do that discussion board feel, giving that as homework, doing some assignments in class, everything being done through Google Classroom that really streamlines everything for the teacher. Meanwhile, 6th grade, doing very similar things, just with different curriculum. They're doing Egypt stuff while 5th grade is doing the colonies. And so what would happen is while she gave the lesson, like if she's giving the lesson to the 5th grade students, the 6th graders are working on something else, not even necessarily social studies related. They're working on other classroom, individual activities while she delivers that lesson to 5th grade, and then she would flip-flop. As the 5th graders are working independently on their Chromebooks, then she delivers the lesson to the 6th graders. And We see much of that again in week 4 for the 5th graders. Only thing that was different is right here under Google Classroom announcement. You'll see here there's a link for quiz 1 on Google Forms. So Google Forms is kind of like SurveyMonkey, but Google's version of it. And so you're able to ask questions and either have them open-ended or have them have a pull-down menu to answer questions or multiple choice, whatever it might be. But you can quiz the students on Google Forms, and then you get all the information put nicely into the spreadsheet for the teacher where all the answers are posted there. It's just a great way to be able to formatively assess those students and how they are doing. The other different thing maybe about week 4 is our intervention expert or teacher now has given out the hard copy of the final project, which is a travel brochure. Both 5th and 6th graders are going to do, or were assigned to do, a travel brochure. So we handed out the guidelines and went over that and went into the initial planning of it. Same thing here with the 6th graders. Again, same project, same guidelines, just different curriculum. 5th graders are working on colonies, 6th graders on Egypt. All right, so then we get into week 5, which is the final week of the intervention. Both grade levels are pretty much doing the same thing, working at their own pace with their teams on Google Drive. There's collaboration that's happening with the peers so that they can finish this brochure. They're completing their Google Slides presentations that they are going to share with other groups. And the teacher is able to go around and monitor because they've shared their folders with the teacher, so the teacher can go on their folder. She could see in real time what those students are doing, what they're working on. She can give them immediate feedback, which is wonderful. That's what I said. And then in addition, they were working on their reflective journal. Then we gave the post-intervention activities. So the post-assessment, the questionnaires for technology and social studies that I showed you earlier, we gave those same questions to them pretty much, and also interviewed the same 5 students on that one-on-one interview. All right, so the data. What we did is we made sure that we replaced every student name with a student ID number and reference it that way, just 1 through 29. We wanted to make sure that we made sure that it was anonymous. And the other thing is if there was a hard copy of anything, our teacher kept it in a locked filing cabinet. Information that was digital, she was kept on a computer that was password protected. And at the conclusion of the 5-week study, everything has been destroyed. As far as what kind of data we collected, there's a combination of qualitative and quantitative data, and you could see there on the bullet points the types of things that the teacher collected for our team to look at and assess. And I'll get into that more on the next few slides. All right, so increasing validity. Whenever you're doing research and you're analyzing the data, you want to make sure that you can increase that validity. So one of the things we chose was applicability and transferability. And this really looks at the trustworthiness of the results that you're looking at. So the question is sort of, will this intervention help with other subjects or with other students or maybe in the future years? We're wanting to know, the results, will we find that with other students if we were to do the same thing but a different group of students, or if we did it in a different subject area or next year? Would those results duplicate themselves or be very similar? So we use things like the teacher observation and her reflections, as well as the students' reflective journals. And also we were able to take a look at the writing samples of those students when they answered those prompts on Google Docs and on Google Classroom. and obviously the final projects for the students, and how they did on that. The next way we wanted to increase validity is we brought in neutrality and confirmability. And that basically means, is this an accurate representation of what occurred rather than the outcome of the researcher's bias or interest? So to make sure that our teacher was not just on her own little kick, we made sure that we conferred with her. She kept her observation journals to make sure she's just recording what she's observing, which is different from the reflection journal where she's putting more personal feeling into how she thought things went. But just what did she see? We were able to share and read those observations, talk about them, talk about what was happening in class, and just make sure we were really just looking at what was happening and not being motivated by something else. Okay, let's see. There we go. Yeah, that's what I just talked about. Okay, the third one was outcome validity. Was there a successful resolution to the intervention? Did it make a difference? And of course, our answer was yes. We felt it was successful, and it did make a difference. We looked at and compared the pre-assessments with the post-assessments, as well as the questionnaires that were asked beforehand and after the end of the intervention. And again, those writing samples. Catalytic validity basically is about, it goes hand in hand with outcome. So with the outcome, does that change the views or the way that a teacher might do things, or those researchers might do things? And absolutely yes. When we looked at the data for the pre and post questionnaires, as well as the interviews and the assessments, it really did affect us and about how we're going to go about things in the future and their final projects. Okay, so our findings. So remember, our first driving question had to do with the motivation and engagement of the students. So I'm going to talk about that first. Here are some of the questionnaires that we gave them about social studies. So the second question was, I like social studies. Now, prior to the intervention, 20 out of the 29 students, or 69%, either said they strongly agree or they agree that they like social studies. But after the intervention, it went up. 26 out of the 29 students, or 90%, said that they like social studies. So we thought that was positive. Learning about social studies is fun and interesting. Prior to the intervention, a good amount, 22 out of 29, or 76%, again, strongly agreed or agreed that they thought social studies was fun and interesting. Yet again, it went up after the intervention, which makes us feel that they enjoyed that intervention, and that unit using the Chromebooks really did make it fun and interesting for them, because that rose to 27 out of 29 students, or 93%. Question 8. Using Chromebooks in social studies affected my engagement and motivation. In the post-intervention, 27 of the 29 students, so 93% of them, said that they strongly agree or agree that it helped with their motivation and engagement. And number 9, how did Chromebooks in social studies affect my engagement and motivation? This was an open-ended question, and the responses, a lot of responses that used words like interesting, excited, motivated, or that it made the learning more fun. So that was all positive news for us to find out. Some more findings on motivation and engagement. This has to do with our technology questionnaire that we gave before and after. So question number 4 had to do with collaboration. Collaborating with my peers on schoolwork using technology was effective. Post-intervention, 25 out of 29 students, or 86%, either strongly agree or agree that the collaboration did help them. 6, I use Google Apps to help me with my schoolwork. Pre-intervention, about half, 52%, said they always use it or mostly. And then we phrased it a little bit differently for the post. questionnaire on this one. I will continue to use Google Apps. And we have 22 out of 29, 76%. So that's awesome that after that experience that they are going to continue to use the Google Apps. 7, I feel confident about using Google Apps in social studies before the unit. 4, since they strongly agree. 18 agree, which was a total of 22 or 76%. But afterwards, look at how much that went up. 9 students for strongly agree that they feel confident about it after using it for 5 weeks. And then 16 agree. So all 29 students, 100% of the class, said they feel confident about using Google Apps. We were very pleased with that. Finally, I feel confident using Chromebooks and technology in social studies. It's kind of phrase word there. I feel confident that using Chromebooks and technology in social studies improved my grades. Pre-intervention, we have 11 that strongly agree, 13 that agree, for a total of 24 or 83%. Post-intervention, that went up to 19 strongly agree, 9 agree, or 97. So I believe it's 28 out of the 29 students that feel confident that using or doing this intervention improved their grade in social studies. All right, so some graphs here. If we look at the proficiency, well, the blue is the pre-intervention. You can see over here, the blue is the pre-intervention, and the red represents the post-intervention. And these are the particular students, 1 through 29. So it shows you how they did at the beginning and how much they improved on the post-intervention. And look at that. That's a huge jump for almost everyone. This went down a little bit. This went down a little bit. But everybody else seems like big jumps in improvement from beginning to end. Here's a bar graph here. So this is how many students were far below the standards on the pretest. That's 72% were far below the standards. 14% were below the standards. So totaling that together, that is what, 86% of the students were below standards. Okay, and we compare that to the red, which is post. We have 21% who were still below the standards, but 62% were meeting the standard, and 17, nobody before was exceeding it. 17 exceeds the standard. So we have a total of 62 and 17, which is 79% that were not only meeting the standards, but exceeding the standards at the end of the intervention. And you can see here in a pie chart form, those same things, that 90 to 100%. Look how many kids are scoring in that range now. And 80 to 89%, and 70 to 79% here. So, I mean, you've just got that little bitty part right here who are just below the standards there. So, wonderful. Okay, so our conclusion is that we do feel that incorporating the Chromebooks into our classroom did increase the engagement, motivation, and proficiency. That the students were able to build these relationships, the camaraderie with the peers, and working. It was just all positive. There was a good sense of morale in the class. Also, the students' self-reflection journal, they mentioned things about how they felt supported, how they enjoyed the cooperation and the working with their peers. They stayed focused on their work. And they really did feel supported by their partners. We also felt like this intervention really helped prepare them for the demands of the 21st century. With the technology, with doing the research, with doing those 4 C's that we've talked about before, that especially this critical thinking part. We've talked about collaboration and communication, working with teams, but this critical thinking, the fact that they're able to really dig deeply, we saw in the writing samples, they answered more in depth than they had answered with pencil and paper in the beginning of the year. We were able to get more out of them. Um, Maybe because it was typing and it was fun, but we feel like the things that we could put on the Chromebook and the information they could access allowed them to interact with the curriculum differently than they're used to. And that motivated them and kept them engaged, which then helped with the proficiency. It kind of, goes hand in hand there. How do I get this off of me? There we go. All right, our recommendations for the future. We feel like if we were to do this again, or we're recommending this to any of our colleagues or other educators, that if you have not used technology, and depending on each person's comfort level with technology, it's going to be different, but that you should try to spend some time investing up front, looking at what you're going to introduce to them, and just getting a little bit more familiar with it if possible. If you're going to use Google Classroom, it is pretty user-friendly, but there's still a little bit of a learning curve. So if you could create a sample class and just kind of play around with it and experiment with that before you actually use it with the students, I think that would be helpful. We mentioned in our written portion that the teacher did make a mistake. She meant to put up a question, which is the one that's kind of like a discussion board, so the kids could see each other's responses and give feedback, but she accidentally made it an assignment. So the kids were confused. Half the kids did this, half the kids did that, and nobody could see each other's answers. So it ended up becoming more of a one-on-one assignment, which isn't bad, but it wasn't the intention of the teacher, and she could have, just bypassed that altogether had she have been a little bit more familiar with Google Classroom. But that's fine. It's fine. Now she knows. We also suggest that you find out what your district policies are about technology, about internet use, things about bandwidth. These are all important things as you get into this world of technology. We feel that Chromebooks can be incorporated into any subject with the same positive results that we saw in our intervention. We used it again with the 5th and 6th grade combination class, but we feel like in social studies, but we feel like you could use it with English, you could use it with science, you could use it with art, you could use this with high schoolers. And so again, that applicability and transferability, validity that we talked about earlier, we felt like our research did demonstrate that. There's something that's called the SAM-R model. It stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition model. This deals with technology and sort of the continuum that maybe teachers are on as they incorporate technology into the classroom. It's by Dr. Ruben Puentedura. Hope I didn't botch that name up too bad, but we put that into our recommendations because it's something for teachers to think about. Because initially when teachers bring in technology, the easiest way is just to do substitution. That, let's just say you're going to write a response or you're going to write a paragraph or an essay. Instead of writing it out by hand on my piece of paper, now I'm going to go and take the Chromebook or the laptop, and now I'm just going to type it. So same kind of assignment, it's just I'm substituting the tool that they're going to do it. So that's sort of the easiest. If you think of like, depth of knowledge, where you kind of have like the 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the chart. This is kind of like that breakdown for technology. So substitution will be easiest, then it goes to augmentation, and then it's a higher degree of how would you say, kind of a higher level of use for the technology, where they're not just using the technology as a tool, but you're using technology to learn. So we really highly recommend just researching that a little bit. And then it kind of feels like it goes contrary to the first thing when we said invest some time up front. But really, if you wait, again, depending on your comfort level, if you wait until you feel ready, you're waiting too long. Okay, sometimes you just gotta go for it, and learn together, and you'll be surprised how quickly the kids pick up on things, and before you know it, they'll be teaching you some tips and tricks on how to do things, and then then you know more, and you're able to help facilitate the next group of kids that you have. So that learning is just going to continue to be cyclical. And so that's it. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you watching and listening. Thank you very much.